The sound of metal crunching against frozen earth was so loud it silenced the whole neighborhood. For a second, even the wind forgot to move. When the snow dust cleared, everyone could see what had just happened. Her pristine silver SUV, the one she used to brag about every Saturday at HOA meetings, sat crumpled against the giant snowman in my front yard. Its hood was bent like an accordion, steam hissing from under the mangled grill, while the snowman, our proud, ridiculous creation, stood tall and perfectly intact, scarf fluttering in the cold air like it was mocking her. My daughter's small hand gripped mine tighter, her voice barely a whisper as she asked if the snowman was okay. That broke me. Not because of the crash, but because in that moment I realized how completely absurd and poetic it was, that the queen of the HOA had just declared war on a snowman and lost in front of the entire community. That day had started so differently. It had been one of those rare winter mornings that felt untouched by noise or stress, where the air was so crisp it stung your lungs, and sunlight bounced off every inch of fresh snow like glitter. My daughter, Hazel, had been waiting all week for the first big snowfall. She ran out the moment I shoveled the driveway, her red hat sliding halfway down her head as she shouted, "Let's make him huge this time." I laughed, thinking she'd give up halfway through, but hour by hour, we built that thing, rolling snow until it was taller than me, packing it solid, layering it until the base looked like it could survive a hurricane. By the time we were done, it looked more like a monument than a snowman, complete with a carrot nose, stick arms, and a lopsided grin that Hazel said made him look brave. Neighbors stopped as they walked their dogs. Kids shouted from down the block that it was the biggest one they'd ever seen. For the first time in months, this neighborhood actually felt happy. That peace lasted about 2 hours. Then came her voice. Lydia, head of the Homeowners Association, self-appointed guardian of suburban perfection. You could recognize her tone from a mile away. Sharp, clipped, always 2 octaves louder than necessary. Mr. Carter, she called, stomping through the snow in her designer boots, clipboard tucked under her arm like a sword. We need to talk about this structure. I swear she looked at that snowman like it was a graffiti-covered wall instead of something a father made with his kid. I tried to stay polite, explaining that it was temporary, just a snowman, nothing more. But Lydia wasn't listening. She was scribbling on her clipboard, muttering about uniform yard presentation standards and potential sightline obstructions. I wanted to laugh. It was just so stupid, but I could tell from her expression this wasn't about a snowman. This was about control. Lydia was one of those people who needed to be the loudest voice in every room. She'd fine neighbors for leaving trash bins visible for more than 10 minutes, sent warnings about unauthorized holiday decor, and once made a couple repaint their front door because the shade of blue wasn't harmonious with the community aesthetic. I told her kindly that the snowman would melt long before any rule could apply, but that was the wrong move. Her jaw tightened. She tore off a citation form and handed it to me like she was serving a warrant. "You'll regret ignoring the standards," she said, then turned on her heel and stormed off. I remember Hazel looking up at me with snow stuck to her gloves. "Did we do something bad?" she asked. I smiled, said no, and went inside. Because honestly, I didn't take her seriously. Not yet. The night came quiet and beautiful, the kind of silence you only get when snow muffles every sound. I was in the kitchen making hot chocolate when I heard an engine rev outside. Too loud, too close. I walked to the window just in time to see headlights flash across the yard, bright and angry. For a second, I thought someone had lost control on the ice. Then I realized who it was. Lydia. She slammed her SUV into drive and floored it straight at the snowman. The crash was brutal. Her car hit the base with a sound like thunder, the front end crumpling instantly. The snowman barely flinched. The thing was packed so tightly from Hazel and me rolling it all day, it might as well have been ice sculpture. The scarf fluttered. The carrot nose pointed down at her destroyed bumper like judgment itself. I ran outside, heart pounding, as neighbors' doors opened and people stepped out in their pajamas and coats, drawn by the sound. Lydia sat in the driver's seat, stunned, the airbag deflated against her chest. For once, she had no words. Hazel tugged my sleeve, asking if the snowman was okay again, and I swear half the neighbors heard her because laughter started spreading across the street. One by one, chuckles turned into full-blown laughter, and in the middle of it all, Lydia climbed out of her smoking car, red-faced and furious. "You think this is funny?" she screamed, pointing at me. "You planted something inside that. You sabotaged me." I didn't answer. I just stood there with my arms crossed, letting her words hang in the cold air. The more she yelled, the more ridiculous she looked. Fur coat, clipboard on the ground, luxury SUV totaled against 3 lumps of snow. "You'll pay for this," she shouted before storming off down the street, her boots crunching like gunshots. By morning, everyone knew. You could feel it in the way people whispered outside the coffee shop, or how the mailman couldn't look at me without smirking. The story had spread. The HOA president had crashed her SUV into a snowman and lost. But the funny part? Lydia wasn't embarrassed. She was furious. And if I'd learned anything in this neighborhood, it was that power doesn't fade quietly. That afternoon, I got an email from the HOA board with the subject line, "Notice of Investigation." It accused me of creating a hazardous frozen structure and endangering community safety. It was signed by the entire board, but the phrasing, words like reckless disregard and compromised integrity, were pure Lydia. I laughed at first, showed Hazel the email, and told her not to worry. But as the day went on, a few neighbors started approaching me with that careful tone people use when they don't want to pick a side. They asked if it was true that I'd used concrete or ice blocks. One guy even joked that I should have a permit for my fortified snow structure. That's when I realized Lydia was spreading rumors. By evening, she'd called an emergency HOA meeting. The community hall was cold and echoing, folding chairs lined in neat rows. Lydia sat at the front with a neck brace now. Yes, a neck brace, and started the meeting by calling me a threat to public safety. Her voice trembled just enough to sound convincing. She claimed she'd been performing a routine neighborhood inspection when her car unfortunately encountered a hidden obstruction. The gasps around the room were almost comical. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up slowly, told them I'd built that snowman with my daughter using nothing but snow and time. Several neighbors nodded. They'd seen us doing it all day. But Lydia wasn't backing down. She waved her arms dramatically. "This man has endangered our children. What if this had been a kid's sled instead of my car?" That's when Frank, my neighbor, retired firefighter, old school guy who'd lived here longer than anyone, stood up and said, "Well, Lydia, my Ring doorbell caught the whole thing. Want me to show everyone what really happened?" The room went silent. Lydia froze, stammered something about privacy violations, then adjourned the meeting on the spot. People filed out whispering, some chuckling openly. As I walked home, a few patted me on the shoulder. "That was something," Frank said with a grin. "Don't worry, I've got your back." But Lydia wasn't done. Over the next few days, she hit me with a barrage of citations. My mailbox was suddenly an inch too tall. My trash cans were visible from the road. Even Hazel's sled marks in the snow were unauthorized landscaping. Each fine was petty, but together they were meant to grind me down. Still, something unexpected happened. People started laughing about it. A woman I barely knew told me Lydia had fined her for planting tulips that clashed with the neighborhood color palette. A man down the street said she'd once made him repaint his shed because the beige was too aggressive. And slowly, the fear that had kept everyone quiet began to crack. Kids started building snowmen in their yards as small acts of rebellion. Dozens of them popped up overnight, some with sunglasses, some holding little cardboard signs that said "Free Frosty." Lydia went berserk, stomping through the snow with her clipboard, shouting at parents, trying to take pictures as evidence. But she couldn't keep up. The whole street was laughing now. That laughter must have cut deep because 2 days later I got a letter from her lawyer. A full-blown lawsuit. It accused me of willful negligence and demanded compensation for her vehicle damages and emotional trauma. Reading it out loud felt like reciting the script to a bad comedy. But then I realized she was serious. I spent the next few days gathering everything I could. Every notice, every photo, every witness statement. Frank brought over coffee one night and played the Ring video for me. You could see it clearly. Lydia's SUV idling for several seconds before she slammed the gas, headlights flaring, metal crunching, airbag deploying. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. "You hang on to this," Frank said. "It's your ace." Meanwhile, Lydia was unraveling in public. She'd been spotted filming my driveway, shouting about illegal snow formations, even accusing kids of vandalism. Then came her big stunt, a community safety demonstration in the park. She printed flyers, hired a local reporter, and built a small snowman prop. Her plan was to drive a golf cart into it to show how dangerous compacted snow can be. Except she misjudged her speed, hit the flimsy snowman too hard, and the cart flipped sideways, dumping her into a pile of snow in front of the cameras. The video hit the internet that night. The caption read, "HOA lady takes on snow, loses again." Overnight, Lydia went viral. Kids made memes. Neighbors shared clips. But humiliation didn't calm her. It made her furious. That's when she started mailing out pamphlets accusing me of being a danger to the neighborhood, claiming I'd planted ice traps and endangered children. She even said I had a history of violence, which was pure nonsense. I wanted to lash out, but I held back, because every move she made dug her hole deeper. People were tired of the drama. Parents rolled their eyes, kids giggled when she passed. Even her husband, who used to trail her around like a bodyguard, stopped showing up at meetings. Then Paul, another neighbor, quiet, unassuming, worked in accounting, knocked on my door one evening. He looked nervous. "I think you should see this," he said, handing me a stack of old HOA newsletters and budget sheets. I used to be on the finance committee before Lydia forced me off. I made copies. I skimmed through the papers. The numbers didn't add up. Thousands of dollars listed for landscaping improvements that never happened. Invoices for administrative costs that looked suspiciously like spa trips and restaurant bills. That night, Frank came over too. We sat around my kitchen table, the snow falling outside, piecing it together. Lydia had been skimming money from HOA funds for years, hiding behind fear and bureaucracy. The snowman had just been the spark that exposed her empire. We made a plan. At the next HOA meeting, we'd present everything. The video, the finances, the testimonies. Frank joked, "Feels like a heist movie, doesn't it?" I laughed, but deep down, I felt something shift. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who'd been bullied into silence. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. People stood shoulder to shoulder, whispering. Lydia arrived last, wearing her neck brace again, cane tapping for dramatic effect. She carried a stack of papers and started her speech before anyone could sit down, accusing me of leading a campaign of chaos and endangering public welfare. Then she said, "And tonight, I will reveal the evidence that proves his guilt." I let her talk, let her spin her story until she was red in the face. Then Frank stood up. "Actually," he said, pulling out his laptop, "we've got a bit of evidence too." He played the video. You could hear the gasp ripple through the room as Lydia's SUV sat idling, then launched straight into the snowman. There was no denying it. No spin, no excuse. Lydia tried to shout it down, saying the footage was doctored, that Frank was conspiring with me, but her voice cracked, desperate. That's when Paul stepped forward with the financial records. He spoke calmly, methodically, pointing out the discrepancies, the missing funds, the personal expenses. With each page he held up, the crowd grew louder. Shock, anger, disbelief. Finally, one neighbor yelled, "You've been stealing from us." The room erupted. Lydia tried to adjourn the meeting, but no one listened. People shouted for her resignation. For the first time, she looked small. The power that had always wrapped around her like armor just vanished. A few weeks later, her lawsuit went to court. She arrived in a dark suit, all confidence and fake poise, her lawyer spinning tales about my malicious snow structure. The judge listened patiently, then turned to me. I told my story simply. A father building a snowman with his daughter, a woman too proud to accept her own mistake. Then I nodded to Frank, who played the video again. You could have heard a pin drop. When the footage ended, Lydia jumped up, screaming that it was fake. The judge cut her off. "Sit down, Ms. Grant." Her lawyer stammered something about technical issues, but it was over. The judge dismissed the case entirely and ordered her to pay my legal fees plus penalties for a frivolous claim. Then, in a twist no one saw coming, her insurance company announced they were investigating her for fraud. By the time I walked out of that courthouse, the world felt lighter. Neighbors who'd come to watch clapped me on the back. Hazel skipped beside me, humming some silly song. For the first time since we'd moved there, I felt peace. A week later, the HOA elections came around. Lydia's name wasn't even on the ballot. She'd been removed after Paul's financial evidence came to light. Frank became the new president. Paul took over as treasurer. The rest of the board was made up of people who actually smiled when you talked to them. Lydia's house sat dark for weeks before a for sale sign appeared in the yard. Rumor was she'd been forced to sell to cover her debts. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. Without Lydia's constant surveillance, people started decorating again. Kids built snow forts in the cul-de-sacs. Parents waved at each other without fear of citations. The next snowfall, Hazel insisted on building another giant snowman. This time, half the neighborhood helped. It turned into a block party. People laughing, tossing snow, kids climbing on shoulders to place hats on snowmen taller than the fences. That night, as I stood on the porch watching the street filled with smiling snowmen, Frank walked over with his usual grin. "Funny, isn't it?" he said. "Took a snowman to bring a whole neighborhood back to life." I nodded, staring at the biggest one Hazel had built, scarf fluttering in the wind just like the first. "Guess it just took something ridiculous to remind everyone what mattered." He laughed, clapped me on the shoulder, and headed home. I stayed a while longer, watching the lights reflect off the snow, the quiet finally feeling like peace instead of tension. Sometimes I think about how all of this started, with a snowman, a clipboard, and someone who couldn't stand to see joy she couldn't control. And maybe that's the lesson, isn't it? You can bury people in rules, drown them in paperwork, threaten them with fines, but you can't legislate laughter. You can't outlaw a moment between a dad and his kid in the snow. So yeah, the snowman still stands. Maybe not the same one, but what it stood for does. And if you ask me, that's better than any victory in court. Now I'm curious, if this happened in your neighborhood, if someone tried to crush a piece of happiness just to prove they had power, what would you do? Would you fight back or let it melt away? Tell me in the comments, because I think the world could use a few more snowmen standing tall against the cold.